Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Wednesday, July 23rd, 2025, episode 445. And we're going to talk about three free societies and contrast it with what we're dealing with today. Um, but basically, these are three societies that Lawrence Reed wrote about for the Foundation of Economic Education, fee.org. And he wrote these several years ago. You might have missed them. I talked about them in class to give when people would push back and they would say, "Oh, well, freedom is okay as a concept, but it could never work in the real world." And so I really appreciated the articles that he had written. And they were brief introductions to these societies, highlighting some of the um, positives of those societies. I'm sure that there are downsides, as there are in any society. Plus, um, they're in Europe, and so culturally speaking, they would probably be a little bit different from what we are accustomed to here in the United States. Nevertheless, let's get into the first society, San Marino. It's on the upper backside of the boot of Italy. At least that's the way we describe it here in the United States. It's the fifth smallest country. It's still in existence, and it's 61 square kilometers. That's 24 square miles, and it is centered around Mount Titan, or Titano, I guess, in the Apennine Mountains. These days, there's high unemployment. That'd be interesting to get into the weeds of the economics of that area, but otherwise, it has low taxes and depends on foreign investment. And the cool thing about it is that they have two leaders called Captain Regents, and they rule for 6 months, right? So that's their term is 6 months. And Lawrence Reed wrote about it in January 23rd, 2022. And the article title is "The World's Oldest Republic Reveals the Secret to Peace and Prosperity." He doesn't really spell it out, but I guess we can highlight it as we go over the article. Um, it's the so it's the GDP per capita ranks among the highest on the planet, almost as high as that of the United States. It claims credibly to be home to the oldest existing sovereign state, as well as the oldest constitutional republic. For most of its 17 centuries of existence, so 1,700 years of existence, it's been one of the freer and more tolerant of the world's countries. It's the name of the country, I guess, is Most Serene Republic of San Marino, was founded by a Christian stonemason, Marinus, who fled persecution of Christians in 275 AD or CE, which is 1700 years ago. He fled to Mount Titan, built a chapel, eventually becomes a monastery, and it's purported that he had healing powers. This I got from a video that was on that article, that was included with the article. And he healed a woman's child who happened to own the mountain, and so she gave him the mountain as a gift. It becomes a free state in 301 AD or CE, September 3rd, 301. And he put a cross on top of Mount Titan, and on it was written the word liberty. As a Pope Boniface VIII asked him what it meant, and he said, the reply was, "Men belong to themselves because they owe no homage to anyone amongst themselves, but only to the master of all things." A reference to God, right? It was invaded twice, once in 1503 and 1739, but was only occupied for a total of 10 months uh, between the two invasions, right? And then Napoleon Bonaparte almost invaded it in the 1790s, but otherwise it took refugees when Italy was unified in the 1800s, and again it took refugees in World War II, 100,000 refugees, which if you uh, think about it, the population is only 33,000 in a 24 square mile area. And so to take in 100,000 refugees is pretty amazing. They are still not a member of the European Union, good on them. And their main industry is finance, manufacturing, and tourism. It's rated the 12th freest country in the world and the oldest republic in the world. I talked about it in class one day, and someone said that they visited San Marino, and he said that it was a really weird place. And that's what I mean by culturally speaking, it's going to be different. You can't expect, freedom to be the way that people understand it here in the United States, and then go there to a different country and start acting in any way that you want. I mean, you have to give respect to the people who live there. And freedom is measured not culturally, but freedom is measured in terms of how easy is it to do business, what are the tax rates, what's the government like in that region. And I'm going to make a statement at the end of this video, but the government cannot be large. It cannot be expensive either. The second article I want to look at is Remembering the Ragusan Republic. And this article was written in April 10th of 2019. So it no longer exists. It existed for 450 years, uh, and the height of its society was the 15th and 16th centuries. But the capital or the center of Ragusa is now the Croatian city of Dubrovnik on the Adriatic, along the Adriatic. And it was once the freest, most prosperous enclave on the planet. It had an aristocratic government, but it dealt largely in sea trade. It was along the coast, and so it traded everything from Spain all the way to Egypt. It got its independence from Venice in 1358, but eventually lost that independence to Napoleon in 1808. And that's because of an earthquake, which I'll talk about in a moment. They paid tribute to remain free over the years to the Hungarians and the Ottomans. Uh, but otherwise, their motto is liberty is not sold for all the gold in the world, right? So freedom is more important than anything else material, right? So obviously, life is the assumption. So either you're living with liberty or without liberty, right? 10,000 people lived within the city wall, and about 100,000 people lived in the entire republic. And like I said, it was all about shipping. But they were able to survive for 450 years, where it was located, very, very chaotic region of the world, through diplomatic skill. And I want to recall Machiavelli here, where Machiavelli, through the prince, tried to explain that in order to maintain power, you have to be really good at politics and diplomacy. Otherwise, you can't stay in power for very long. And so there it is. Ragusa was not a military power, but rather they were able to stay free with virtually no military because they made free trade agreements with everybody else. So the free trade agreements kept the peace, and they never used their wealth for territorial expansion, unlike a country many of the listeners of this podcast live in, right? Um, so the secret, and Lawrence Reed says, the secret to Ragusa's remarkable success was unmistakably its liberty. The government was aristocratic, but it was small and limited and pretty much corruption free. There were term limits on the civil officials, right? The top official. They could only serve for 1 month at a time before they had to step down, and you couldn't take the office again for 2 years. And so that basically made it the Hong Kong of the Mediterranean. Women were given a lot of economic freedom because it was really easy to do business there. There was very little red tape. Slavery was abolished in 1416 when slavery was all the rage. You may recall that in 1492, 80 years later, 70, 80 years later, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and then turned everyone into slaves, where he landed in Haiti or Haiti. The society also had gotten rid of debtors' prison, right? So if you got into debt, you didn't go to prison, but they had a bankruptcy law. And so they settled debts without prison. There was a lot of protection of private property, which is necessary for prosperity and economic growth. They had low taxes. And so having good laws mean that the society is going to be just. They had honest money, where when other countries were inflating their currency, they kept their honest money. And there was this saying, this motto was inscribed in their scales house, right, where they would measure their scales and check their weights and measures. It reads like this: If our weights cheat, then we are cheated. As we weigh goods, God is measuring us. And so there's this overarching kind of moral imperative that they have to be honest, right? So this society, not only is it free, but it has to be honest, right? And this is something I think that a lot of people miss today when they talk about greed or wealth. They leave out the honesty part, right? And you kind of have to, because the accusations against greed is a little bit disingenuous, because the people leveling the accusations of greed are themselves pretty much wealthy, or they want to be wealthy, right? And so there's that hypocrisy component as well. So anyway, um, it all comes to an end in 1667. There was a major earthquake. 75% of the buildings were destroyed and they never recovered. And so Napoleon basically conquers it in 1808. And if you remember, Napoleon recognized San Marino and let it continue to exist. And so clearly, Ragusa was in trouble. Um, which is why Napoleon took it over, right? A lot of things had probably changed as a result of the earthquake. And the last article I want to talk, and Last Society, is written also by Lawrence Reed in February 9th, 2022, the gorgeous European microstate that boasts one of the best tax climates in the world. And this is Andorra, which is 181 square miles, twice the size of Boston, with a population of 77,000, and located right on the border between France and Spain. But it's an independent, right, microstate. And they have, what is it, 10 a million, or oh man, this might be a typo, but I think it was 10 million tourists per year because of skiing and shopping. So with a population of 77,000 and you get millions of tourists per year, you can see, that even though it's a landlocked country, it it doesn't really engage in that kind of trade, but rather tourism. Its history goes all the way back to the 8th century, uh, so younger than San Marino. But basically, it's formed because of the conflict between Christians and Muslims. Charlemagne, right, who unified France, he he protected it, but Charlemagne's son made it independent in exchange for a small tribute. They gave ceremonial positions as a result. They have ceremonial positions for the president of France and the Catholic bishop in Catalonia. So yes, Macron, the president of France, is a prince in Andorra, and of course he is no longer the prince once he leaves office. But there it is. Uh, Reed notes that the schools are free of government control, and they also have a strict naturalization criteria process. So all of these places, you can't just simply become a citizen there, obviously. There are strict rules for naturalization, and they also have low taxes. And you don't need to have high taxes because the government is small. Their terms are short. So if you think about it, it's more of a penalty to be part of the government. But there's emphasis on the culture of freedom, which is probably perpetuated through by their education system. So I wanted to highlight a couple of common themes of these three free societies. Number one, they're really small, right? And so if you're an elected leader, well, everyone's your neighbor. The people you are ruling over are your neighbors, right? Especially if the population is 33,000, it's very easy to see your leader at the market, right? When you're just hanging out. And so if they're upset, if they're angry, if they don't like what you're doing, you find out very quickly there's not a lot of places to hide. And so you're more accountable for everybody. Plus, the theme of freedom, right, is very much there in all the societies, right? And it's I've said this in several of my episodes that if you use freedom as a starting block, not rights, right? Not like this, like I'm entitled for this or I need this or that, instead of this arbitrary declaration of what you think you deserve, right? Pay us what you owe us kind of mentality. But if you start with freedom, right? And of course, if you have freedom, there's responsibility that comes along with it. Well, then you don't care about a lot of other things. You're too busy living your life. And so it's a lot easier to perpetuate and preserve this when your country, when your state is very, very small, right? Everyone is held accountable. The educational system as well is geared towards perpetuating freedom, teaching everyone how important freedom is. I would love to go visit these places and just sit and talk to them and pick their brains because I know that because of culture and history, their concept of freedom will be interesting, right? How they understand freedom and how they practice freedom and how they continue and perpetuate freedom. I mean, you have to have, like, freedom has to be part of your DNA uh, so that you don't abuse the wealth of your society and then turn away and bring in authoritarianism and communism and all sorts of other kind of stuff. So that's the emphasis, right? So the states are small, so there's a lot of accountability, and there's a major emphasis on freedom, and that leads to prosperity and this really pleasant uh, atmosphere for people to get along with each other. That's not to say that they don't have their little idiosyncrasies, which would weird out a lot of people from the West, like particularly the United States, right? They'll probably say, "Oh, you can't spit on the sidewalks. Oh, you can't throw your trash on the ground." Like a lot of people seem to think is their right to do here in the United States. But I think those are more the issue when Americans go to these places than anything else, right? So you just learn the rules. It's like going to someone else's house, right? You learn the rules, the house rules, and then you live there and you enjoy a large measure of freedom. All right, so contrast that, right? So government is small, term limits are really brief, right? So a month or 6 months, a very, very brief, and government really doesn't control much of anything. All right. Contrast that with our society today, where we just basically swim in propaganda, where people will casually say the most horrific things, the most unbelievable, unbelievably horrible things. And, people are not, you know, storming his house and asking him to step down from Congress, right? And so basically, I'm talking about Randy Fine, who Ron Paul talked about today. I've seen his name, and I generally, when things are over the top, ridiculous, I just keep scrolling on because I can't. My tolerance for that level of stupidity and narrow-mindedness is really low because it's just so outrageous. But Randy Fine, who is Jewish, I mean, he advertises it not only because of his name, but also because he wears a yarmulke everywhere he goes, I guess, virtue signaling his Jewishness. But he basically said, let the Palestinians starve, which is quite horrible because you realize that there are babies that are starving to death in Palestine. And so it's just crazy. And to say that what he said was outrageous is somehow anti-Semitic. I mean, come on, really, America? Really, Florida, right? Because he's a representative from Florida. Wow. And I really believe that history will not be kind to people like him and his ilk, right? So he says these things, which are totally ridiculous. There's nothing free about that at all, right? So that's what we have. Instead of people saying, yeah, do what you want, but take responsibility for your choices, we have let the Palestinians starve. It's just so crazy. And it's the opposite direction of prosperity, right? So if there are a lot of people in government who are saying and believe this kind of garbage, then we are moving in the opposite direction of freedom and prosperity. We are moving in the direction of authoritarianism and decline, collapse, maybe social collapse even. Another story that I saw, this ties in with the honest money aspect of what I just said. Um, but Vince Lancy was talking about how Japan's top gold dealer is restricting physical withdrawals of gold, that if someone wants to close their account, that they get paper, right? They get cash, not the physical gold. And so Korea had actually stopped doing this in November of last year. And so Vince Lancy, and usually he's right. So I'm not, I mean, when he tries to make market predictions, sometimes he's right, sometimes he's wrong. He's usually right. But when he takes a stab at trying to figure out uh, what's going on in terms of this type of phenomena, he's usually right. And I think it's because he has more evidence, which he doesn't discuss publicly, but he discusses behind his paywall and the membership stuff. But he's usually right when he says this. But the reason why Korea stopped gold purchases to the average consumer and Japan has stopped it is because there is a big buyer of all of their gold, and that would be China, right? So he suspects China. And it's what I said before when I talked about cryptos, right? People in the West, or at least in the United States, are crazy for the cryptos, which that's their choice. But the rest of the world, and I'm talking the rest of the world, especially if that statistic of 95% ownership of Bitcoin is in the United States, well, then the rest of the world is not looking at crypto as the future. It's looking at physical wealth as the future. And a lot of people in the United States are missing that train, right? Whereas China is doing everything it can to accumulate as much as it can, even and the way that the stealth buyer is buying up all of Japan and Korea's gold is what they do is they say, yeah, any source that you have, we buy it before it even hits the refineries, right? And so they capture all the gold and they're positioning themselves economically to basically become the next world power, which is going to happen because America is shooting itself in the foot, doing everything it can to guarantee and ensure that it will no longer have the reserve currency, no longer be number one in the world economically. But they did it to themselves, right? We did it to ourselves. At least some of us are should try to all as many people as possible should try to make preparations for what's coming so that when everything goes sideways, we can at least, continue to preach the message of peace and freedom. Because when all of that happens, a lot of people are going to want to point the finger and seize power, right? So prepare yourself mentally, spiritually, physically, psychologically, whatever, uh, because it will happen. The only question is when. But sorry to end it on a down note, but I wanted it to be a positive episode, talk about those three free societies and how they did it. Have a very small region with a very insignificant government with honest money and honest laws, short terms for the political leaders, and we can have a free society. And you don't have to have a big military. You just have to negotiate trade agreements with people, something, right? Which we don't do in America anymore. There's no diplomacy any longer. In fact, America America does everything it can to avoid diplomacy, avoid talking with people. It's bomb first, and there's no one to talk to later, right? Whereas all of these free societies, it's about let's talk. Let's talk about how all of us can benefit moving forward. And I would just wish that more and more people would remember that that's how you create happiness, prosperity, and peace. And that's it for this episode. I'll talk to you guys next time.